Welcome to Salt and Light Songs, a series where we sit down with musicians to reflect on stories of people who lived out their faith. This is just one part of a four-part conversation with Derek Miner, rapper, singer-songwriter, record producer, and entrepreneur. If you're just joining us, check out our Substack for the full story. And if you're back, welcome. Let's jump in. Kind of transitioning a little bit as we talk about Salt and Light, something that we try to touch on a lot in our comics is kind of what it looks like to be Salt and Light, not just in the church, but in the culture. We would love your thoughts on kind of what that looks like. Wilberforce and Moore were abolitionists. They were against the slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
And Wilberforce famously had this tension kind of, how do I, as a Christian, also work in this political field? And John Newton famously told him that he suggested that he could do both. He could be a Christian and kind of work in this field. And like we talked about with you, you've got rapping and producing, entrepreneur. What kind of wisdom do you have to share for people who are trying to be salt and light, not just in the church, but more in these secular spaces? Like, how do you do that well?
So when I look at the scriptures and I look at the call that God even had on the nation of Israel from its inception, it was never for Israel to have a moat around it to where people couldn't get to it. It was to the Jew first, then the Greek. But it was meant to go to the Greek, meaning that the believer and non-believer. It was never just to be for us only. It was always meant that he told Israel that I gave you the oracles, but the goal was to give the oracles to the rest of the world. It was never, God's economy doesn't work with keep, store, create bigger barns. God's economy is always meant to give away. And what happens in the church, I see, is that we often want to just store all the grace, all of the comfort, all of the peace inside of these four walls, as opposed to do what Jeremiah says, which is seek the good of the city. But that was the point from the very inception of why he called Abraham out of Babylon, was not just to create Israel, but it's so that God's kingdom would expand across the world, and that we would be examples of what the kingdom looks like, but not just examples between one another, but for the whole world to say, oh man, well, when we get into an argument, we abuse one another and hurt one another. But when they get into an argument, they talk it out. They come to an understanding. So maybe instead of doing it our way, let's do it that way. You see, that it's always been the point. And I think because of our desire for comfort and being in a culture, especially as Americans, where comfort is at the highest level of what we all seek, unfortunately, we've let that seep into the church. As opposed to saying, let me make myself uncomfortable for the good of the city.
That just reminded me of last time we recorded. It was just Mark and Josh and Josh was kind of talking about how light is needed where there is not light, and kind of that uncomfortability of it. And like you were just saying, when you're in this world, you're talking to people who are rapping or singing about things that are hard. So as you're kind of surrounded by hearing about things that are hard, or they're maybe living in a way that you're not trying to live by, how do you live in that tension well, and kind of stand out as salt and light as you're living maybe with people who don't believe the same things that you do?
I'm still working on it.
For
So
sure.
I'm not going to consider myself a guru or expert at it. But what I found is the more I realize what God has brought me from, and the distance. I mean, even when Mark knew me, during this time, I was struggling with a lot of trauma and a lot of things and I had my own things that were happening between my ears. I'm a lot different now than I was even when we were doing ownership. And because I know what it's like to be in chains and to be liberated, that's what I want for everyone else. But at the same time, I also understand the gulf that people have to travel to get to certain points in their life. It's not microwavable. And there's this perspective, and sometimes God does miracles where a person is going one way, they get swallowed by a fish, spit up on land somewhere else. That happens. But you notice that doesn't, those are very sensational things that have happened in the Bible. That's why they're recorded. They're recorded because they're sensational. Like, oh my gosh, God used a fish to get Jonah where he needed to go. But I don't think that that's the rule. That's the exception to the rule. The rule is constant laboring. The rule is constant love. The rule is turning the other cheek. The rule is these people aren't going to get it. When you look at the scriptures and you look at the story of Israel, it's literally him saying, hey, I love you guys. And Israel saying, yeah, but let's go chase idols. And he's like, no, don't do that. Come on back. Like Judges is literally a loop. God frees them. They go chase idols. They get trapped and ensnared. God frees them again with another judge in another generation in another time. That is what we see in the scriptures, is that unending, never ending, always persistent, always pursuant love. That is what we should be embodying. Not this microwavable, if you don't agree with me, I'll just throw you away. It's like, nah, I'm gonna sit here with you and we're gonna keep wrestling until we figure out what's going on.
That's good. Yeah, for sure. We talked a lot too last time we recorded about Daniel and kind of how he really had to know the Lord and scripture and know the love of God to be living in a space with such tension. This also reminds me, one of the things that stands out to us about Wilberforce and Hannah More is that they influenced and shared truth through art. So through writing, through plays, through stories, to kind of shape people's imagination. So do you see your own work and with Ownership is the New Black and with your music as part of that tradition, as sharing truth through art? And how do you think that sharing truth through art is powerful?
Without a doubt. And the reason why is because art is so powerful that you forget that you're not in the story when you're watching a great movie. Like you really believe when I'm in Avengers, I kind of feel like I'm in the cockpit of the Avengers jet flying, and Thor's back here, and I'm a fly on the wall about to go beat up the bad guys, right? When you're in a great movie, it does that. When you're in a bad movie, it reminds you it's a movie. Same thing with music. When you hear a love song, you feel like you're in love, right? That's what makes art so powerful and also very dangerous in the wrong hands. So my goal is to make art that is so amazing and so good that you're like, man, I forgot where I was for a second, and I'm only locked into the beauty that I see. Or I'm only locked into the issue that I see, and it makes me want to go do something about it in real life. Yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts. So, as someone who's engaged with culture politically in business and through music, like to me, it seems like the music industry has this kind of clear and then probably in some ways invisible wall of here's Christian content, here's non-Christian content. And I feel like that doesn't exist maybe in general entrepreneurship. You're not like, if you're opening a bake shop, it's like, well, is it a Christian bake shop? That's not a subcategory. Have you brushed against that in ways that you didn't expect or ways you did? Or like, what has your experience been with that kind of, I don't know, those kind of barriers?
So the main issue with that barrier is if you ask 100 people what it means to be a Christian, you're going to get 100 different answers. But if you ask 100 people what it means to be a plumber, you're not going to get 100 different answers.
Mm.
So the biggest challenge is, first, what do you even mean by Christian rap? What does that even mean to you? It could mean a plethora of things. That's probably the biggest challenge. I don't believe we live in a time where being a Christian is a disadvantage. I guess it would depend on what you want to be a part of. So, maybe if I want to get a sponsorship from Budweiser, I don't know if that'll work, because they're like, how many Christians drink? I'll be like, well, it's actually a lot, but
What do you think?
a lot more than you think. But it's just the idea of people like, I don't know if this fits. This raisin in the potato salad, but that's really the biggest issue, is we kind of are all trying to grasp, what does it mean to be a Christian in 2026? And what does it mean to be a Christian for the rest of our lives? And I just try to bring what my part of that story is. But I think that's what every artist does. I don't think that that's specific just to Christians. What does it mean to be a rapper in 2026? There are people that thought Post Malone was a rapper. There's people that think he's not a rapper. What does that mean? I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a helpful parallel to put it into, like, just any artist is kind of living with those expectations of who they're supposed to be and how they can fulfill that.